Good evening, everyone. I'm Joanne Myers, and on behalf of the Carnegie Council, I'd like to welcome you to this public affairs program. Our speaker is Gilles Kepel. He is an internationally recognized authority on the Arab world and one of the leading experts on French Muslims. Today's discussion is based on his book entitled Terror in France, The Rise of Jihad in the West, which first appeared in France shortly after the attacks of November 13, 2015, and has been updated for this highly anticipated English edition. And his book will be available for you to purchase at the end of the hour today. Just as our speaker's earlier books on political Islam are valuable primers for anyone interested in this subject, I'm confident that you will find Terror in France to be an invaluable guide for putting modern jihadism into a historical and comparative perspective. And if you're interested in knowing more about this topic, I encourage you to visit our website at www.carnegiecouncil.org and type in Gilles Kepel. It is always a privilege to welcome Gilles to this podium, but no more so than at this time. With the recent French election, the rise of jihadist movements, and France being one of the biggest Western exporters of jihadists, his book could not be more timely in our quest to know more about this matter. You may recall that it was only a few weeks ago, right before the first round of the French presidential elections, that terror returned to the streets of Paris. As the world watched on in horror, the most visited country on the planet had once again become a hotspot for a bloody terror attack. This time it was a policeman on the Champs-Élysées. The paroxysm of violence that intensified 2 years ago in Paris and later throughout France has left many Frenchmen asking, why has their country become the hotbed for jihadi terrorism? While tensions surrounding France's Muslim community have long been simmering, this new siege of violence has added to the apprehension and fear that terrorists will strike again. This has only grown worse with the recognition that hundreds of French citizens fighting alongside ISIS, more than those from any other European country, will be trickling homeward from Syria and Iraq. In seeking to understand what propels Islamist terrorism, why radicalization occurs, and why France appears to be the primary target for these attacks, Gilles did extensive fieldwork in France's neglected neighborhoods, in particular its infamous banlieues. This research, along with his reading of primary source material in Arabic, provides additional answers to what motivates this unprecedented form of jihad in the West. The question that immediately comes to mind is, what does the future hold? What can be done to halt this virulent wave of jihadism? For the explanation of the causes and roadmap for the future, please join me in giving a very warm welcome to our guest today, Gilles Kepel. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joanne, for this very kind introduction. And I'm going to try to live up to the expectations you have raised, which will be a terrible challenge. It's always a great pleasure to be back here, and I would like also to, as I'm at the end of my career now, I would like to thank you because you've always stood with me, and whenever I had a book coming in English, and you were always the first person to invite me to Carnegie, so this is a place which is very dear to my heart. In the good old days when I gave a speech here, I did not have a police car in front of the place because I had not been condemned to death by my object of study, actually. But this maybe is the fate of the Orientalist today when he tries to be consistent. And, well, this is, I hope this is part of the parcel of the kind of the intellectual challenge and the intellectual fight, should I say, which is being waged. As you very aptly recalled, we're just France was just is just out of an election, a presidential election, and Emmanuel Macron was elected with flying colors on Sunday, and it came to as a surprise to many people, not only because this person who was known only by a limited group of friends and colleagues in 2 years or something came from anonymity to President of the Republic, and he's the youngest chief of state of France since Napoleon Bonaparte, something I said to the BBC the other day, and I said, you know, the Brits should be careful because this even though they won at the end, but because they cheated, of course. And but also because most pundits would predict that Marine Le Pen, the candidate of the extreme right, would come first at the first round, and that she may not win the second round, but she would make a very, very strong showing. And much to the surprise and the dismay or the hope of some, Emmanuel Macron came first at the first round, 4 points ahead of Marine Le Pen, and he really trounced her at the second round when most estimates were that she would make some 40% of the votes, and that she lost probably 5 to 10% because of the final debate, where she was really not up to par, and also because well, she was not really good on the economy, but she thought that the Macron was soft on terrorism, and she started to attack him. And then he said to her that you know, jihadists actually wanted her to win, because the more votes for the extreme right, the more French and European societies are perceived as racist, xenophobic, and so on and so forth. And then the more the jihadists are in a capacity to say to their co-religionists, there is no hope in the French society, there will be no integration, and therefore the only thing you have to do as Muslim is to rally under the banner of jihad and of violence, and to break European and Western societies. And so this was a good point she made, definitely, and he made, sorry. And therefore, she probably scored far less votes than expected. Now, why is it that he managed to win with this sort of landslide victory? And also, why is it that the extreme right could not benefit of jihadi terror in order to have a better vote? It so happened that over the last 6 months, all attacks on French soil by jihadi terrorists were foiled, except the one you mentioned, the policeman who was killed in the Champs-Élysées 3 days prior to the first round. They were foiled because of two things. One was that the attacks on the Islamic State so-called Islamic State territory, the bombings and the droning, and had some matter of efficiency. And you know, people there were busy saving their life or battling on the battlefront, and therefore they had no real time and energy to plot. And even if I may open sort of personal remark here, the guy who had condemned me to death 3 times was droned in February by an American missile. So I'm maybe the only French Trumpian here, because he saved my life to some extent, so I hope. And therefore, the Islamic State had lost its capacity for coordinating attacks in Europe, though, as we shall see in a minute, this model of jihad that has hit Europe and France in particular so harshly over the last years is quite different from the American model of jihad, the one that led to 9/11, and I will try to explain why briefly. And that's one thing. And the other thing was that after a while, and you know, there is some sort of, should I say, political economy of jihadism and of terrorism. You know, it's not that difficult to kill people, but it's more difficult to mobilize on your behalf. And if, you know, attack after attack, murder after murder, you do not mobilize the masses on your behalf that you want to mobilize, then violence and jihadism turn against their perpetrators. And this is what had happened. This was what had happened already during the first phase of jihad between 1979 and 1997 in Afghanistan first, where it the jihadists had a success, but they were backed at the time by the petro-monarchies and the CIA. Then they failed when they tried to duplicate the Afghan jihad in Algeria and in Egypt, among other places, from 1992 to 1997, because the extreme use of violence alienated the very people they wanted to mobilize on their behalf. Then you had the second generation of jihad, which was embodied by bin Laden and Zawahiri, his mentor, which considered that the reason why the masses in the Arab world had not mobilized under the banner of the jihadists was that they were afraid, because the West was so mighty and so powerful. And therefore, they had to move the target from what they call the nearby enemy, I mean the local apostates, quote-unquote despots, to the faraway enemy, and the faraway enemy being America. And so that the masses would see that the West was not that mighty and would not be afraid. And also, by the same token, the jihadists think of history in a way which is sort of peculiar, because they think that they have to relive the experience of the Prophet and his successors. And in the same manner as the Prophet had, and his successors rather, had destroyed the Sassanid Empire, which was one of the superpowers at the time, and then turned against Byzantium, which was the other, the jihadists in Afghanistan and after had destroyed the Sassanid Empire of today, which was the Soviet Union, and then because they thought that they were the ones who led to 11/9, not 9/11, that is to say the fall of the Berlin Wall, and then that they would turn against the Byzantium today, which is America. And the 9/11 raid was something that thought was not going to destroy America, but to undermine, to sap its power, and give us a sort of psychological sign to the masses that the West was not that mighty. Then it did not work either, because they were convinced that when the American army went into Iraq, Afghanistan and Iraq, it would be defeated. It would be a new Vietnam for America, or a new Afghanistan for the Soviets in Iraq, which did not happen, because Iraq being a Shia majority country, they could not take the Sunni jihadists, and they sort of cornered them in what would be the Sunni area of Iraq, which would then lead to the Islamic State. But they did not succeed. And then there was this third generation of jihad, which came into being in 2005. And, the first generation was had as an ideologue a Palestinian called Abdullah Azzam, who had written this book, Join the Caravan of Jihad. At the time, propagation of ideas was difficult, and the fax machine, I don't know if anyone remembers what the fax machine is. It's a museum for prehistorical things, where you may find one, was the vector for propagation. During the second generation, it was television, satellite television. And 9/11 was sort of created using the narrative of Hollywood, the Hollywood narrative, and it was to catch the attention of people who were watching the 8 o'clock news. The jihadists did not control the media, even though Al-Qaeda and Al Jazeera had, they had some access, but it was the Qatar government, it was different. Now the third generation doesn't need satellite television, because we have the networks, because we have everything is online, because you have the messenger services and so on and so forth. And this book, which was called the Global Islamic Resistance Call, was posted online in January 2005 by a Syrian engineer by the name of Abu Musab al-Suri. And it was the third phase of a sort of Hegelian dialectics of jihadism, the Aufhebung, or the overcoming of jihadism. He said the first generation was mistaken, because this nearby enemy, no one is interested when Muslims kill Muslims in the world. See Yemen, for instance, who's interested in Yemen nowadays. The second phase, America, was okay, but America is too far away. Really, it's really far away, too far away, and too mighty. The right target should be Europe. Europe is the soft underbelly of the West. There are scores of disenfranchised young Muslims there who are children of immigrants who don't have jobs and who live in the banlieues or whatever. You know, that banlieue is now the only French word that you need not translate. In the good old days, it was champagne, parfum, what have you. Now it's banlieues, as you say, the Upper West Side. And as they say. And so they would, those people, they thought, are the new soldiers for jihadism. They are ready to be mobilized. And as opposed to 9/11, when they sent a bunch of Saudis and Emiratis flying in the skies, right? Now they reach out to the grassroots. And it's not a top-down phenomenon, as was the case on 9/11. It's rather a bottom-up phenomenon. For the Arabists here, Suri, the name of this Syrian engineer, calls it Nizam la Tanzim, i.e. a system and not an organization, and a network-based system. Now, how do they proceed? Instead of having a sort of central command, they have an ideology. They have people who are brainwashed, and the prison incubators in Europe have played an enormous role to bring out petty criminals into jihad, because jihadists are sort of higher above intellectually, and they serve as role models. And also, they would let those people, to some extent, choose their targets in their vicinity. The issue is not a major, spectacular event of a magnitude comparable to 9/11, but a multitude of smaller events, or with some magnitude, like the Bataclan musical Paris attack, for instance, but that will accumulate and lead European societies to retaliate violently against Muslims in general. Desecration of mosques, what have you, lynching, attacks, and so on and so forth, that will ultimately lead to the breakup of society and to enclave wars, which will lead to civil strife, and finally the victory of jihad, or whatever, which is, of course, ideology, but which sort of reached out to a number, not that many, but enough young people to engineer that kind of attacks and problems. And as you know, the French we had 239 people who died between the Charlie Hebdo attack in January 7, 2015, and the stabbing of Father Jacques Hamel, a Catholic priest in Normandy, on the 26th of July 2016. And this was clearly something that made a very, very strong impression on the French, and that was, in a way, that was hijacking the whole political agenda. And so, how did it function? It functioned because, as opposed to the second generation, to bin Laden's top-down, pyramidal, Leninist, if you want, model, or secret service model, the jihadists understood from the scratch the digital revolution and how they could use it, which the intelligence agencies just missed. As I mentioned to you, the Global Islamic Resistance Call was posted online in January 2005, and then something very important happened on February 14, 2005. So when I ask my students, usually they look at their shoes because they think they're going to get a bad grade on that. And finally, one of the blushing students, and one of my former students is here, so she may play that part, says, giggling and blushing, "Sir, it was Valentine's Day." I said, "Yes, it's a right answer, Paloma, but this is not the answer we want. It was the day when YouTube got its license in California. And, the two blended. It's a three-week distance. And therefore, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, Telegram, what have you, the messenger services, which allowed for the network system to function and to go under intelligence radars, right? And that and the prison incubators and the unemployment and the rise of Salafism, i.e. the cultural break in values with European societies, that created this sort of, if I may say so, this halal cocktail, which led to the phenomenon. Now, as far as France was concerned, you know, the real wake-up call came on the 19th of March 2012, 5 years from ago, which was already at the time, because we have now five-year terms for the French president, which was at the beginning of the campaign for the presidency that François Hollande would win against Nicolas Sarkozy, who would not be, the incumbent Nicolas Sarkozy would not be re-elected. So this first attack, which happened in Montauban and Toulouse, two cities in the southwest of France, were performed by a French-Algerian kid called Mohamed Merrah. Merrah in Arabic meaning someone who's happy and so on. And he did it not only in the midst of the beginning of the electoral campaign, which rose a number of questions of whether he did that alone or who was behind it, and we're still awaiting the trial of this affair because it's a very complicated issue. But he killed people exactly by the book, the book that Suri posted online in January 2005, i.e. he killed apostates, i.e. in his view French soldiers from Muslim origin. Some of them were not. They were French Caribbeans, but they were victim of his jihadi profiling, if I may say so. And he also killed Jewish pupils or Jewish students, very young, at a Jewish Hebrew school in Toulouse, and one of their teachers. Because Suri had said that in order to mobilize the masses, you have to kill the apostates, the so-called apostates, because those ones are the bad Muslims. And you know, if Muslims work in the French army, the French police, or whatever, so they're going to be a countermodel to jihadists. And this is very important to them. I mean, their blood is licit, as they say. And Jews, because he thought that because of the Jewish Arab or the Israeli-Arab conflict in the Middle East, this was something that would reach out far above the traditional sympathizers of the jihadists in the Muslim community. But more important than that, so that you understand the interaction between a number of different registers of mobilization, the 19th of March 2012 was the 50th anniversary by the day of the implementation of the ceasefire between France and Algeria at the end of the Algerian War of Independence. And Merrah was born in a family that, from Algerian descent, that hated France. And you know, one of the brothers who did not side with the others wrote books about that. And the mother said that she was so glad that her son had brought France to its knees. And you know, and in order, I'm insisting on that because, you know, therefore you have this sort of, as I mentioned, I don't know how they translated that in English, but the retro-colonial past. This sort of colonial backlash, in a way, that fuels the present-day jihad ideology. So it's not only jihad, you know, coming from the skies or wherever, or from hell, or wherever you want, but it's also something that clings on deeper feelings, which have not been dealt with, and. Add to that the fact that there was a very strong unemployment issue in France, and this is one of the reasons, I guess, why Emmanuel Macron, strangely enough, because he campaigned on the fact that there would be a major law reform, which will, of course, be resented by people who are unionized and so on and so forth. And he campaigned for Europe, which is not a great demagogue theme in European politics today. The reason why, in a way, this was popular was that people are so desperate at the fact that the job market is such a catastrophe. But when someone talks about a significant in-depth reform of the job market and of the education system, because the reason why one of the reasons why people are not able to have jobs is that they're unable to deal with the postmodern digital economy, if you wish. Therefore, he strikes a chord. And even though people know it's going to be hard, nevertheless, they're so worried for their kids. Even middle-class people like me are very worried for the kids. I mean, and for the French, the fact that so many of our kids who studied in France all that, then emigrate to the US or to Britain. Britain is going to be more difficult now, but or to Australia. This is a national shame for us, And France has never been a country of emigration, not that much. It was always a country of immigration, and this is something which goes deep into the national psyche. And so this, of course, led to the present situation. Now, as I said, we had 239 dead. Charlie Hebdo, the attack on the so-called Islamophobe journalists. Then the Kouachi brothers, who had been arrested earlier on because they wanted to go to wage jihad against the Americans in Iraq, but did their time in jail and then got out. Then they killed a French policeman from Algerian descent, another apostate. Then they went to kill Jewish customers at the hyper-kosher supermarkets. Then the same system, And by the book, always. Then there was the Bataclan musical attack. Then the Nice attack, where the truck which went into the crowd on Bastille Day, 14th of July, in the Promenade des Anglais, in the French Riviera, hitting two targets simultaneously. I mean, the Bastille Day is considered the celebration of the infidels, because this is the Enlightenment, the French Revolution, the society which is godless, therefore it should be punished. And also because, people are on the beach in their bathing trunks or half naked, as we are in France. And therefore, this is hedonism, which they have to punish. And think that a few days after the attack in Nice, where among the 86 dead, 30 people were people from Muslim descent. Then the beaches were invaded by women in burkinis. And you remember that this was a great controversy, and the New York Times, as they usually did, started its usual French bashing and saying that, France, which was the universal victim because of all the dead, suddenly became the universal persecutor, and laïcité, or secularism, was the sort of Stalinism or the gulag that France had become for Muslims. The reason why there was a ban on burkinis by local authorities, actually, was that, though it had no legal basis, because when you do not conceal your face in public in France, you can dress as you want, was that they feared that public order would be under threat, because people would retaliate for the killings against women who were displaying their burkinis on the beaches, which were right under the place where the truck had been taken into the crowd. And then it was broken by the State Council later on. But then it's an interesting issue, because you see that the symbolic issues are extremely important, and they are not entirely shared from one shore of the Atlantic to the other. So after this attack in Nice, and after the stabbing of the Catholic priest, then the Islamic State's system of attacks started to dysfunction. And as I mentioned, one thing was the fact that the Raqqa and Mosul and other places were bombed and droned. The other one was that French intelligence, after many years of questioning, had finally managed to break the codes, and they arrested preemptively most people who had sworn allegiance to the Islamic State and were ready to sacrifice themselves and wage suicide attacks. And also, I believe that there was something that we had seen already in the previous phases of jihad, that is that, after such a display of violence, and in spite of the few sympathies that had been channeled for those people, nevertheless, mobilization did not happen. And after a while, if I may say so, there is some sort of jihad fatigue, if you forgive this expression. And people start to believe that, violence turns against the perpetrators and not against the victims. So this is, I believe, where we are now. There is, of course, a lot of hope in France after Macron's election, which may be short-lived because now he has to face the parliamentary elections in next month. He doesn't have a party, but he has already destroyed the Socialist Party and smashed open the right-wing party. So we'll see whether or not he's able to gather a majority on his name. Usually, over the last, we've had this 5-year term for 3 times already, with Chirac's second term, Sarkozy, and Hollande. And usually, electors do not contradict in the parliamentary election the votes that they gave to the newly elected president the month before. Otherwise, it looks like they think like they're dumb. Even though many say that the reason they voted for Macron was that they voted against Marine Le Pen. But now, do we want to have a stable country or an unstable country? So I think he will have a majority. And this is not my field, but now that jihadism is central in French politics, even the jihad specialist can say what he thinks. And so there is a lot of optimism, because not only of the youth of the new president, but also because of his ability to address the in-depth issues of French society. Whether or not he's going to implement it, well, this is politics, and if you still invite me in 5 years' time, and if I've been mistaken completely, I'm sure you will remind it to me with your very kind manners, and but I will nevertheless prepare an answer. So, in this anticipation, if I may say so, I would like to thank you for listening to those little introductory remarks, and I'm at your disposal for the terrible Q&A grilling, which is...
Well, thank you very much. There's a reason we're called the doyen of jihadist studies. I invite you, those that have questions, please come to the microphones on either side and introduce yourself and try to keep your questions brief and to the point. We'll start over here with Mr. Starkman.
Thank you very much, James Starkman. How would you account for the fact that there seems to be, maybe I'm wrong on this, a much lower level of jihadist violence in Germany, which has many more immigrants than in France?
How many days do we have to? Let me try to put it in a nutshell. If you notice, you're right in general, but over the last months, it was the other way around. That is to say that because there was this jihad fatigue to some extent in France, and because I think that, French security services, after being overexposed to those issues, were able to understand it, to break the software, to break the codes of the jihadists. Then a lot of this violence transferred to Germany, where the security situation is complicated, because every land in Germany, all the landers each of them have their own police services. Coordination is difficult. And the French centralized state, which everybody scorns, of course, is slow. It's like a diesel engine. It's slow to heat. But then when it works, it is functional from top from the top to the lowest part of the system. So I would not, I would not bet that Germany is living an easy situation now, and there is an enormous amount of concern in German CT nowadays. Now, why is it that it was not the case before? Why is it that we were the ones with the 240 dead and with the policemen and not others? Well, the population is far more important in France than in Germany. Not the general population, but the proportion of people coming from the Muslim world, even though, of course, not all of them, of course, the huge majority of them have nothing to do with the jihadists and they hate their gods. But ISIS, or Daesh, as we say in French, using the Arabic language acronym, is an Arab thing. It's not a Turkish thing. It's not an Indo-Pakistani thing. Even though it can be translated, nevertheless, its ideology resounds much more deeply in populations who have Arabic as even, if not their language, at least the language of reference of their family, right? Also, there is this colonial thing, which sort of fueled the ideology. There's the unemployment issue and so on and so forth. Now, Germany was sort of spared that because there is no colonial past with the Muslim world in Germany. They have other problems with their past, but not this one. And they also had a population which was predominantly Turkish, right? Which means very organized, like the Germans to some extent. And whether they were Kurds, pro-Erdogan, anti-Erdogan, or what have you, you could pass a message to the chief of this or that organization and the guys would deliver, right? So it was organized, and they had some Kurdish versus Turkish, whatever, infight, but nothing much within German society. There were jobs, and Germany still has an industry. It's because when just mentioned BMW, which is well known in this part of the city, or a Mercedes, and Renault or Peugeot are not going to come up to par with that. And also, there was something important, which was that Turks would, at the time, not really meddle with Middle Eastern issues, right? Now, the situation has changed tremendously because Mrs. Merkel has accepted 1 million+ refugees who are not Turkish. When you go, for instance, I was in Berlin a number of times because my books were translated into German, which is a bad sign because when a book of mine is translated into a country, it means that the country does not go well. And and I was amazed in Berlin and all other places. There are signs for refugees, They are written in Arabic, in Urdu, in Farsi, and in German and English, of course, but never in Turkish, because the Turks are not concerned, right? And the refugee issue is very complicated for Germans because they have no go-betweens. There are no intermediaries, if you wish, and no one delivers. And the refugees have become sort of cannon fodder for the jihadists, and like the terrorists who drove the truck into the Breitscheidplatz markets in Berlin was a Tunisian who had gone in prison through prison in Italy and then was sort of hiding amongst the refugees. So this has led to a very serious fear and has sort of mechanically boosted the extreme right, the Alternative für Deutschland party, which is sort of trying to ape Mrs. Le Pen. And but the German state, which has far more money than the French state, has invested an enormous amount of effort in the education of refugees. They have people who teach them German day in, day out. There's a sort of German machine which is working. And on the long run, I mean, I guess they're optimistic, but you know, how to deal with the short run is going to be difficult. And this is why we have this sort of, with Macron in power, is so pro-European, and Mrs. Merkel or Mr. Schulz, whoever is in power, but who's also very European. I believe that, you know, there's this feeling of hope in the EU because Europe can only work if there is a dual German-French engine, you know. And now that the Brits are out, things are going to be much easier.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you for coming. I'm Mariana. That question is kind of in vein of what I was wondering.
Can you speak up, because I'm an old man?
Sure,
and I'm
that
deaf.
question was sort of in vein of what I was thinking, but I was wondering why countries that are less stable and more recently post-conflict, like Bosnia and Herzegovina,
Who are more what?
like post-conflict, like
Oh,
Bosnia and
post-conflict,
Herzegovina
sorry, yeah.
and Kosovo, why they're not more vulnerable and susceptible to and targets for recruitment, cells, things like that, because of their high population of Muslims, and because they could also be capitalized on certain sentiments and things like that. And also
So if I understand you
unemployment.
well, why is Kosovo less of a recruitment ground for jihadists than France, for instance? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and other European countries that have high Muslim populations and are less stable.
Well, maybe because they have enough with their own problems, and they are not going to go to Syria to sow mischief, among others. Well, you know, if you want to go to Syria, you have to have some means, you know, to buy your plane tickets, to buy your fatigues and your weapon, your knife, your whatever, and I'm not, and they may believe that they would better stay where they are. But you have some Kosovars in the ranks of ISIS, definitely. You know, it's not a phenomenon that all of Europe was touched. The French had the highest contingent with more than 2,000 people, including women and children. But then there was a very strong German group. I mean, more than 7,000 Germans. And but there again, not that many Turks, you know, mostly converts and people from Arab descent. Some Brits, significantly lower in proportion than in other countries, because the Indo-Pakistani immigrants or people from Indo-Pakistani descent have enough with Kashmir, you know, on their plate, and Syria is not that central to them. So there's another cause, if you wish, which is in competition. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Finn Fogg. I have a friend who's a real right-wing Israeli who claims and says that Macron does not understand, appreciate the jihadi threat, is not prepared to deal with it. Indeed, that he catered to the Muslim vote, and that if he were voting in France, he would have voted for Le Pen, even if, assuming she has a certain less than pro-Jewish background. Is he right?
He is extreme right, as far
Yes,
as
he
I
is.
understand. But her father has more of a grudge against Jews than she has, and she's been very careful to be surrounded by Jews and go to Israel, make pro-Israeli statements, and so on and so forth. And this was one of her main line of attacks against Macron. And in the debate where she really underperformed, she attacked him relentlessly until, you know, she said that he was weak, she didn't understand, and so on and so forth. And so let me tell you a personal story about that. when the French edition of the Terreur dans l'Hexagone was published in January, I was interviewed in a French radio program, very popular in the morning. And in the book, as you will see, and I recommend that not only you buy 10 copies for you, but you also many copies for your Israeli friend, who I'm sure reads English, and
I'm going to send him a copy.
Very good. That's excellent. In case you lose one, and you can send 2 or 3. So no problem. We have no objection. And you'll see that in the book I try to explain that the more jihadi attacks we have, the more the extreme right benefits from it, right? And there is a sort of congruence. And also that, I had no time to develop that here, but I've studied the political grammar of jihadi videos, mobilization, and a number of extreme right videos in France, and they are congruent, if you like. The vocabulary is different, but the grammar is to a large extent comparable. Now, the journalist who didn't know what congruence meant, also say it in French, and said, "Well, Gilles, you say that the National Front and Daesh or ISIS are just the same, right?" And I said, "No, not exactly. They're congruent. What?" And then she was listening to this radio program because it's very popular. It's her electorate. And she was down at the time. It was December 2015, and she had hoped to win the regional elections in France, in the north and in the southeast, where she made her, the majority of her votes. And so she started to tweet images of decapitated hostages of ISIS in their orange jumpsuits, because what she wanted to mean with that was that they were different from ISIS, because they would not do that, So people like me, who said that there were congruences, were just idiots. Now, the problem was that when she did that, she sort of proselytized crime. And therefore, that led to the fact that she's now losing her immunity as a member of the European Parliament, because to some extent of yours truly, which she overreacted. So when there was the debate last week between Macron and Mrs. Le Pen, so she sort of attacked, and on that, and finally he said, "Well, it is well known that by all knowledgeable people that the jihadists would like you to be elected." And only today, Professor Gilles Kepel just wrote that, and then she shut her mouth, because this was a bad memory that she had last time we were in a confrontation. So you'll tell that to your extreme left Israeli friend. And,
Thank you.
Thank you so much for this.
My
My name is Kira Bowles. You mentioned that there was the mother of a terrorist in the south of France who was pleased that her son had brought France to its knees. Just with that in mind, I'd be grateful for your thoughts on the role of women in this area.
Well, this is a very important issue. Saying that women is an important issue in America is something which will make me pass through the customs, right? At JFK. Because there is an enormous proportion of women and of converts, female converts, among jihadists who went to Syria and Iraq, or Iraq, as you say here, but we know that Iraq rhymes with Chirac, so we say Iraq, not Iraq. And why is that? For a number of reasons. One thing is that there is this sort of romanticized idea, sorry to sound like a stupid macho, but of love, sacrifice among some young women who, consider that in the sort of postmodern, whatever marriage, one-night flirtation life, which is what many youngsters live through today, a partner who's able to sacrifice his life is a really valuable person. And that you would follow him, And in schools, for instance, there is a lot of proselytism by aspiring jihadis who sort of seduce young women so that they would convert to Islam with this ideal that they share, you know, that, and they tell them that their understanding of Islam is what will redeem mankind for all its evils and so on and so forth. So, and there is this feeling that, you know, the young women will be nurses, they will be instructors, they will whatever. Plus, there is a very strange issue, which I may not go too deeply today tonight with you, which has to do with this sort of very strange sexual patterns of the jihadis, with the, you know, the women being widows, being immediately reused, if I may say so, by the next combatants, and so on and so forth. So it's something which plugs into a number of very deeply psychological issues, which have to do with the malaise of a number of young women. But nevertheless, many of the returnees or the people who come back from jihad, who escaped and went back to France or to Belgium, which is also a great jihad country, were women, because many of them were, you know, were exposed to the gulf between the gap between their illusions and what life under Daesh, under ISIS looked like. But more of that in the book, of course.
Thank you, Edith Everett. A number of years ago, some friends and I visited the French consulate in New York because we wanted to discuss the problem of anti-Semitism in France. And we had a really fine discussion. The bottom line was, why weren't they addressing the problem? Because it was coming from certain areas.
Coming from certain
areas,
yes.
You know, the Muslim communities particularly. The answer I got, which was very disturbing, was the police are afraid to go there. Now, if that's the case, and they were very clear about that, they don't want to start up with these people. I wonder about the outgrowth of these problems as a result of neglecting them in the first place.
Well, had I been the Consul General, God forbids, I would probably not have made this answer. But being an academic, I can speak the truth. I don't think that the police is afraid to go there in general. I mean, those banlieues were depicted time and again by the American press that your friend in Israel reads as sort of no-go zones and so on and so forth, which is not true. I mean, the police is there. But there is a very strong pressure on people who are not like-minded, right? Whether they are for instance, in some areas, if you look Muslim and if you don't fast during Ramadan, you'd better move. But you know, this is also a phenomenon which was well known in America. I mean, some areas, this side of the river, this is east, right? Were Jewish and Italian immigrant areas, and then those populations were replaced by others, as you know. And this is something which you also see in France now, that, you know, a place like Sarcelles, which was one of the main centers of Jewish immigration from North Africa and Egypt, is now where, you know, which is called the Little Jerusalem of the French banlieues, with, I don't know, 27 synagogues or something like that. Now is being peopled increasingly by immigrants from North Africa. And this led to clashes which translated into the fact that Christians from the Middle East went to live together with Jews in Sarcelles in order to have a sort of balance of population. I hate to say that because in France we don't know about ethnicity and things like that. But so you have those phenomena which are to a large extent, comparable to phenomena that you lived, you experienced with even more blatantly in the U.S. So it's not that the authorities are complacent with anti-Semitism. I don't think so. It's that populations are reallocating, they are moving according to the change in the population, which is what I think you call white flight in this country, right? Or am I mistaken? And so you had this kind of thing also in other countries, France among others. But now, because Jews were targeted, definitely, by jihadists, and the Mera affair, this was not only Jews who were targeted, kids, who very, very young, and the monstrosity went to the fact that a guy had a GoPro camera and he filmed that, sent it to Al Jazeera, which did not show it. And then he justifies the thing, saying that, a young Jew would be a soldier in Tzahal later on. So, the same way the suicide attacks in Israel, attacks against women, kills, and the elderly, was that they were soldiers, even female soldiers, would-be soldiers or retired soldiers. Therefore, their blood was licit, as they said. And the same happened in the hyper-kosher supermarket attack, and then that led to a record amount of aliyahs from France, and Prime Minister Netanyahu came and said, "Come to Israel because you're safe. It's a safe country. There are no attacks in Israel." But this is part and parcel of the way the world is going. But I don't think that that this phenomenon has to do with the fact that the authorities are too soft on the issue. It's a much wider problem.
Thank you. So my question is actually an academic one.
Oh.
Works like, I thought you would be more comfortable
I
with
have
that.
to be careful, right?
So books like Knights Upon the Prophet's Banner,
Sorry?
books like Knights Upon the Prophet's Banner,
Yeah.
the Surrey work that you mentioned, Wahhab, the Maududi, Milestones, all of these things are the building blocks of an ideology, right? The things that have created this ideology over time, the backbone of it. And yet, I would venture to say that half the arrestees, people who wanted to travel, people who wanted to do something here in the United States, are barely familiar with these works. Certainly less so than a student at the LSE or SOAS or Sciences Po. I don't know if you see the same thing happening in France, and if so, what you think that means in general for the ideology in the West.
Okay. Well, in the digital age, no one reads book anymore, except my students whom I borrow from, and even them, they probably read a Wikipedia thing. But this was a big debate that opposed me. That we have a great Kulturkampf in France. On the one hand, you have this person whom you know here as Oli Roy, whose real name is Olivier Roy, and on the other hand, myself. He says, that this for him, because he would more or less use this same reasoning. He says that he contends that 20 years ago we had the Red Brigades or the Haute Armée Fraction, right? Now we have the Green Brigades. Tomorrow we'll have the Blue or the Yellow Brigades. So the radicalization is the essence of the phenomenon. But you take the tools which are available, Marxist, then jihadist, then nationalist or whatever, or environmentalist or what have you. And definitely there are common trends due to unemployment, due to frustration, due to whatever. Nevertheless, if you do not study simultaneously the social dynamics of those movements and the ideology, and if you don't have access to the texts in the original, you do not understand the nature of this kind of a mobilization. The fact that, for instance, the Red Brigades did not target Jews, for instance, as well. The lady has gone away, or apostates, right? Now, it makes a difference when you target Jews, apostates, and so-called Islamophobes, right? And then you understand the nature of the mobilization, its failures, its shortcomings, its successes, and so on and so forth. So, for instance, Roy has this line against me. He says, no one, he says two things. It's totally useless to know Arabic when you study what happens in the French banlieues, because they all know French, or backslang at least, French. But this, which I think is not true, because when you go to the mosque or listen to the sermons or you see what's on the internet, even if it's in French, most of the case, so-called French, nevertheless, it refers to Weltanschauung, which is deeply grounded into sort of the Islamist understanding of what Islam is about, right? The text that you mentioned, Sayyid Qutb's milestones, Nights Under the Prophet's Banner, the Global Islamic Resistance Call, whatever. And it does not, and then he says, no one ever read Abu Musab al-Suri, the guy who wrote posted the 1600-page manifesto. Probably because it's really boring. And even I did not read the 1600 pages. I translated what I thought was important, but it does not matter, because, you know, parts of it are being taken, tweeted, retweeted, forwarded, and everything. And this creates a worldview in the digital age where, you know, you don't read the text. What you trust is the forwarded message or the tweeted message from someone you trust, right? And this is the networked and the reticular system, the rhizome system, through which the ideology is propagated. And, you know, I guess that even in the Red Brigades that Ollie Roy takes as his paradigm, I'm not sure that many had read the whole volume of Das Kapital, right? It goes through hearsay, peer groups, and friends. You know, friends now is a word which you cannot use because friends, it means you're a Facebook friend and nothing else. So this is why I believe this goes, you can't, you know, the ideology is there, it's the backbone, but it's not implemented directly. I mean, a number of activists or the prison guys who, the ex-cons who go and kill people, I mean, have no idea, they can hardly read a book, right, in whichever language. And, but it does not matter, because what they're suffused by is the ideology in the books or in the videos or what have you. And if you read this book, you know, provided you can read a book, but I'm sure you can, you'll see that I've analyzed in depth a number of videos and messages, you know, precisely to show what the congruences between the extreme right and the jihadi grammar, because both of them are sort of refer to identity, to atavistic things. They think there is no future, right? That things were better before. So either you're a true Muslim in the jihadi Salafi sense of the meaning, then you break with everybody who's not one of them, or you're an atavistic white Frenchman or woman, and then you say that there is no room in French citizenship for people who are not from French blood or what have you, you know? And, but none of the people who are mobilized on that really has read, has developed, you know, the capacity for reading a whole book usually. But it does not matter in the digital age.
We have two people standing, so I'd like to combine their questions, very brief, and then we'll end it for now and continue at the reception. So your question first, and then this lady over here. No, the lady that was standing right there, she's been waiting a long time.
No, we'll take three,
okay.
no problem.
We'll take three, quick.
Thank you very much. My name is Lubna Kayali, and thank you. My question is, in your opinion, what are the main reasons that make it difficult, and specifically structural reasons that make it difficult for certain segments of the Muslim communities in France to healthily assimilate in France? And in your opinion, are there systematic ways to address those structural reasons?
Well, it's
Maybe we just take that other one, let's just combine them all.
okay, fine. So I'll try to, so be it.
My question
If
actually
you could get
follows
closer to the
close-
microphone.
Sure. So you spoke earlier about ISIS's ability to message and resonate really heavily with the disaffected youth in France, the Muslim population. I was wondering if you could speak to how you think the Macron administration could work to counter
Macron, sorry, okay. Yeah.
to work to counter the violent extremist messaging in the ISIS propaganda while still maintaining their laïcité and secular outlook in the government.
This is what you call catch-22 in English, right?
Given the rise of the far right's influence on our current administration and the danger that we may be pushed into the kind of opposition that the jihadists want, what are your thoughts on what we should do about this and what language we should use in talking about Islamist terrorism as opposed to Islamic terrorism?
Okay.
I think people want you here all night.
Yes, but I have a dinner engagement. So well, thank you very much. Let me try away. The worst challenge is that how I'm going to address those three questions in one sentence. Okay, okay. Well, and remember what was the first question also, which is at my age, I lose memory.
Everyone wants to know what we're going to do.
Okay, well, I don't know. The quandary definitely is to be able to address, to engage a population so that it believes that what is common is more important than our differences. And this is the big challenge. Now, if you go to school, the French always thought that, whatever your color, wherever you come from, whatever your religion, as long as you go to the French school, like the Palestra in Greek, in the Pericles era in 5th century BC, Athens, you share the values, then you're French, right? Like someone like me who's from Czech descent. I mean, I don't feel Czech at all. I mean, I like Bohemia, of course, but becoming a child of Bohemia, as they say, enfant de Bohème. But or many others. I mean, if you look in, there are no telephone books now because we all have iPads, but or iPhones. But when there were telephone books, you would turn the pages of Paris telephone books, and most of the names were not French. Kepels and others, right? Foreigners. And but those people were totally assimilated at the time. But we had jobs. You got education, you got a degree, you got a job. Now you're a school graduate, high school graduate or whatever, or college graduate, you have no job. And then you think that the know-how that the school gave you does not allow you to get into society and to have upward social mobility, to think of the future. And therefore, the values that are correlated with those know-hows are thrown away, just like the baby is thrown away with the bath's water. And therefore, this is why I think Macron has stated as his two priorities, education reform, so that kids coming out of schools would be able to deal with the digital age, which they are not apt to now, and B, the labor market reform, which I think it's going to be very difficult, but it's a tough thing. And this is the prerequisite. I mean, when you deal with de-radicalization, which is a very strange concept because people don't know what radicalization are. So, what are you going to something which you don't know? And it has not worked. Well, you're dealing with the consequences. You have to address the consequences, but you have also to address the causes. It's as symptomatic medicine is something you have to do, but you also have to do what I don't know what to say in English, etiology. I mean, look at the causes. Otherwise, you won't cure the diseased person. And this is the big challenge. So, was it an answer that fitted the three questions, you think?
Absolutely.
Very
And
good,
if they
thank you.
have more, they can continue the conversation, which I invite you all to do. Thank you for
Thank you very
joining us,
much.
and thank you.